Hello. Today we're going to be talking about MVC, which stands for Model View Controller. And this is a architectural approach or structure that we give to our code base, as opposed to having one large file with different sections of the code being in the same actual file. We split it into different modules or sections that are interrelated. And this helps us in case we want to update a specific portion of the code base later. Maybe we want to try a new front end framework, or maybe we are doing some back end work. It helps us kind of make sure we are working in the right place while also helping us debug if there are any errors being thrown. We know where to look in order to address the problem a little bit more specifically. Before we get into what the job of each specific section is, I want to go over just kind of the flow of information. So it starts with the view, and what isn't pictured here is the user. So imagine there's a user here interacting with the view. And that what happens is the user makes a request. Say they refresh the page, or they click on a button, or they interact with the page in some way that sets off a chain reaction. And that chain reaction, first off, gets passed to the controller, which then decides which model we would have to send this information to. And there can be, I only have one model listed here, but there can be many different models. The controller routes it to the specific model that should receive this request. The model does some informational data logic with it, and then sends it back to the controller, which sends it back to the view, which shows it the update to the end user. So that's kind of the flow of how everything goes with MVC. As you notice, the controller is the centralized hub, and I guess that would be a good one to start talking about. The controller is the only section of the code base that can communicate with the model and the view. It's also important, though, that the controller doesn't have any access to the actual data or contents of the model in the view. It's simply there to direct that stream of requests and responses. It performs no data logic on its own. Additionally, we have the model, and the model is solely responsible for interacting and updating, as well as verifying and validating data with a database. So when it receives the request from the controller, it contacts the database and verifies if this information is correct. Are there any new information that we need to add? Are we deleting something within the database? When we talk about CRUD, the model is what is doing the CRUD stuff. It is what is actually like performing that action. And thirdly, we have the view. The view renders all front end code, so this could be React or EJS or handlebars, and it receives the data from the controller. As you see here, the model passes back some data to the controller, which passes it to the view, and the view takes that data in, parses it out, and then dynamically renders a specific page or rendering engine that we're using. And then once that like handoff is done, it displays the change to the user. So if you will indulge me on a little story, I was a teacher last year. I've since left teaching, but I used analogies to really communicate these sort of complex topics to my middle school students. And so I wanted to apply that strategy to Model View Controller so that way I could, one, learn the material a little bit better, but also have a better way to explain it. And so if you imagine that there is a kingdom with a king who the citizens are not very fond of, but he puts on these beautiful firework displays. And he actually even involves the citizens because they can make requests for what fireworks they want to see, what colors, what size, what order. The citizens can be involved in the process, but they have to follow the system. Now, the king, knowing he's not very popular, knows that if the citizens were able to get both the materials to make a firework and the recipes for putting them together, he would be overthrown. So he sets up a system which separates out those two aspects. So the citizens go to the firework crafter who has all of the materials to make a firework, but they don't really know how to put one together on their own. The citizen shouts what they would like over the wall, The firework crafter listens for that event, and if they hear a request, they send a courier with a little slip of parchment with the request on it down and down and down to the chief officer. Now, the chief officer, they don't have time for knowing how to build a firework. Their whole job is knowing the layout of the kingdom itself and also where to send specific requests. The chief officer receives the request from the crafter and then looks at their giant document of firework recipe keepers. These are people who, for generations, have maintained and stored these essential documents on how to make a firework. Once they receive the request, they determine which one's the most appropriate and sends the courier down to the appropriate firework recipe keeper. The firework recipe keeper looks at the request, looks at all of the documents that they have in front of them, tries to match them as best as they can, and then sends the courier with new instructions back to the chief officer, who again couldn't be bothered. So the chief officer sends them back up to the crafter. The crafter now has the correct order that they need to mix these supplies in, so they are able to put everything together and then send off the firework for the townspeople. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great day.